Okay, so without further ado, let's get into it. So thank you all for joining us. This Tech Week presentation about the CMDB. So before I get into it, just for people within the room, I just need to do some housekeeping things. So the fire exit is straight down the corridor, just towards the end, the last door on the left, and then restrooms are also just around the corner there as well. Please help yourself to refreshments as you already have done, but please just keep going for it. And then all of those joining from home as well, please also put some more people joining us. Trying to push the slidey door. Thank you very much. How's it going? Take a seat. You might want to go around the other side. Good afternoon. Thanks for joining us. Please help yourself to refreshments. And I would also like to introduce you to my esteemed colleague, also co-host here today. You should be able to see him on the screen. He's the author of Enterprise Service Management, which is the foundation of what we're going to be talking about today. He's joining us online. He's in Wellington. Mr. Mark Harrison, please introduce yourself.
Cool. Hello. Thank you. Hopefully everybody can hear me. Yes. So thanks, Darren, for the intro. Yeah. So I've been around with Deloitte for a little while, probably about 10 years plus now. And as Darren mentioned, my background is kind of physics, but also across many roles within different projects. So a couple of major retail transformations in the UK. Worked in pretty much every project role you can kind of think of, including leading some program of projects as well. And then came to New Zealand, got more into service management and how to actually be a provider of those service management workflows rather than a consumer of them, trying to get stuff over the line for a project. So that's kind of one of the transformational projects there was where we're asked to reduce headcount by 90% for a government department. And that was sort of the impetus really for getting a framework because ITIL v3 wasn't going to cut it at the time. So that was the bleeding framework. We had to take it back to first principles and figure out why stuff worked. And from that came enterprise service management. And in the last session, we kind of covered the foundation for that. We'll probably do a bit of a recap and I'll let Darren go through into the more detailed content that we've got for you today around how to actually put ESM into practice. Cool. Thanks, Darren.
Thanks, Mark. So I'll introduce myself. So I'm Darren Sowter. I'm a consultant in technology and strategy, and I specialize on the ServiceNow platform. And so, yeah, without further ado, let's just get straight into it, shall we? So traditionally, the CMDB seen as a repository for assets and infrastructure, labeled as inaccurate or not very valuable by senior stakeholders, and often misunderstood. But why is that? And more importantly, what can we do about it? Why do 85% of organizations fail at creating a CMDB? So that's what we're going to be talking about today, and that's what we're going to be asking ourselves. So we're going to be going through some game-changing shifts of perspective to bring us back to basics. We're also going to show you a few case studies and evidence where this has worked. And we're also going to be talking about the implications of how to gain the maximum value of your CMDB. So why do so many organizations fail when it comes to implementation initially? All too often, we come across these scenarios. So discovery is turned on. The CMDB is flooded with CIs. Attributes, soft attributes, which are undiscoverable, are populated as a one-off process. And then they're forgotten about, so then they become stale. The responsibility is put down to a central team, and then they often then become overwhelmed. Linking specific records to CIs becomes really difficult because there's just too many CIs to choose from. And then not enough attention is given to any governance processes or any supporting processes around it or any accountability. And over time, it presents itself as an operational challenge. So records become linked to random CIs, people ultimately become frustrated. So to break that cycle, we then need to remediate the CMDB. But by acknowledging the patterns, what we can do is address them and create a strategy around it. So how many of you have heard these common scenarios? So my CMDB just isn't accurate. I don't trust the data. It's too hard to maintain. We just don't have the resources to maintain. So that's what we're going to be we're going to be transforming that thinking today. We're going to be talking about a functional approach to modeling the CMDB in line with the enterprise, so that things just happen, so that it then becomes a single source of truth. It's a means to see service health, and also create a culture where everyone is responsible and work assignments happen automatically without any manual intervention. So coming back to basics, if we have a look at what the CMDB, it's a busy slide, but essentially the CMDB is all of these things surrounding it. It's not just the data. So good output on the left hand, so it's a good output on the right hand side, encourages good input from the left hand side. So what do we mean by that? For example, I'm just going to take a little bit step back here. I'm aware that maybe not everybody is familiar with the intricacies of the ServiceNow platform, but if we take a service management process and we then look at how you can populate the CMDB, there's a tool in ServiceNow called Discovery, and it detects the infrastructure and it populates that data accurately within the CMDB. So that's one input that you can have. And then on those configuration items, you have attributes such as the support group for that configuration item, the change group, and the assigned to group. And then these are the things that you can use within the service management processes. So let's say a customer, they have an issue and they need to raise that issue. They can create an incident. It's a form. So an incident comes through, the service desk select the CI that's affected, automatically populates the support group. Let's say we can do that. And then in turn, you can automatically populate the assignment group. By doing that, it just creates efficiency. It's really fast. It gets the issue to the person who's responsible for fixing it. But if it was wrong, well, then they're going to let you know about it. They know where to update it. And that place would be in the CMDB. So again, good output encourages good input. It's a culture of continual feedback. So I mentioned services, I mentioned a service offering, but what is a service in an organization? So a service is there because your organization wants it to be there. And if we take a look at some ITIL and SIAM concepts, there are three main actors. You've got the consumer, you have the integrator, and then you've got the provider. So what are these? So if we give an example of buying a mobile phone, you've got a customer that walks into the mobile phone shop. Before they get there, a delivery driver will deliver the actual mobile phone and the SIM card. The sales rep will take the customer through their options, and then in order to activate the SIM card, they may call up a mobile phone operator network, and then they may get a third-party person involved to do any verification against the customer identity. So there's a few things, a few services being provided in there. But as far as the customer is concerned, they just consume a single service in purchasing that mobile phone. But by understanding the essence of a service, we can better appreciate the role of the CMDB and the part that it plays within enterprise service management. And I mean, I chose a mobile phone service there, but you can apply this to all industries. So imagine healthcare, for example. Like we all have maybe seen a doctor at some point in our lives, and then you may get referred. You may have to get a blood test taken. That then goes off to a lab. Then you may have to go be triaged or diagnosed. You have to go see a specialist. So again, it's the same concept. So for those who joined Mark's talk earlier this week on enterprise service management, this slide, this is going to look familiar. So enterprise service management is dimensional. And there are 4 dimensions to enterprise service management. You've got your assets, aspects, entities, and actors. So what are these assets? Let's think of this as your organization balance sheet. Aspects, these are the ways of working. Entities, think of this as your org chart, and then you've got your actors. And so these are essentially your stakeholders. So all of these together is a comprehensive makeup of your organization. So just let's take a focus on assets and delve into a bit of detail here. So we've got data. So what is this? This is information and knowledge within your organization. You've got tools. So this is your software and your hardware. And let's remove it from IT for a second. We can go into an industry like farming. Your system could be your tractors. And then process. This is the way work is governed and carried out. So workflows, for example. And then we have purpose. So traditionally we would have called this people. However, with the AI now becoming very mainstream, AI essentially can do something that a human could do in its role. But why is it doing that? It's doing it for a purpose. So it changes from to purpose. But all of these dimensions, if you put relationships between these, this is essentially a way to architect your CMDB.
Cool, as we shall show. So Darren mentioned entities. All right, so as an organization, you have complete control how you want to structure your organization. Right. So if you want to set up a load of teams that are providing services, or you want to set up your teams by capabilities, absolutely fine. Right. You have complete control to design your org structure, or model, however you want. Right, so that's a logical structure. And that is, you basically set that up in order to generate value for your organization. Now, on the other hand, to generate the value, you need to invest in assets. So the assets of the purpose, process, technology, and data tools and data that Darren mentioned, those things have value to your organization, and they are ascribable, which means that they're owned by somebody. So there is some kind of ownership accountability there. Right, so these have value and they require investment and maintenance. So what you really want to know as a leader in the organization is, how can I get the best return for my investment? Right, so how do my assets contribute to value in the organization? So services and entities co-create value per ITIL, and assets have value, which is the fundamental definition. So in order to do that, we need to, hang on, Darren. Back a sec. We need to use a technique. So we mentioned it was a multi-dimensional model, right? So what it means is you can look at one dimension in terms of another. So we're looking at entities in terms of assets, and it's basically asking how are assets configured in order to serve. So an asset has value, but the configuration is the use of that. So as an example, we have, if you have a temperature as a service that you want to provide, so you're building air conditioning, basically, you'll have air conditioners in boxes. They are assets, great, they have value, but what you need to do is get them out and configure them. You need to put them around and turn them on, set them to the right temperature. That's the configuration in order to provide that temperature service. So those configured air conditioners plus the relationships between them, where you put them and what's dependent on what, and the control unit and that sort of thing, that's your configuration items plus relationships, which is configuration. Cool. So it's the what to the how of service management. And last time we sort of covered that this is the logical model of your organization. So while ESM is a model for all organizations, this basically is your model for your organization. That's what config is, and every single piece of work you do through the service management system, you need a context to that. So it's the what to the how. Cool. So there's a couple of implications from this. We mentioned there's a link between entity and asset, and we mentioned that's ownership. But if you think about your traditional configuration management database, your CMDB, there's a couple of things that kind of people don't have or don't do particularly well. And one of them is entities. Right? Think about how many times you've seen entities in like a business service or something similar in a CMDB. So firstly, a lot of people don't even bother having this. Secondly, if they do bother having it, they need to first define what those classes are. So like they spend ages arguing about what a business service is and what a technical service is and that sort of thing. And then if you manage to agree the classes definitions, you then have to argue about what goes into those classes. And then when you finish doing that, you finally find out that actually what you've put in there is so abstract and so not relevant to the executive leadership that actually it's not giving you any value anyway, so nobody bothers using it. And you've got no ownership, which is the second point. So you've got this many-to-many web of dependencies in there, which everybody has traditionally. So your runs on, uses, consumes, and all that other good stuff. It's great, you can discover it. But at logical layers, you can't really maintain that other than manually. And also, as we said before, the key point of this is to link entity to assets, and you want to know who owns it. Therefore, you need an ownership model. So what we're saying is we want to organize our assets into entities through ownership, and there's a single hierarchy. And this tree is a game changer. This single hierarchy, one parent owner, because it's accountability basically is what we're trying to model, is an absolute game changer, and we'll show you how over the course of the presentation. There's a couple of other relationship classes. I'll let Darren cover those in the next slide, but this is sort of what we covered last time. And if you want to go to the next slide, Darren. There was, so this was the example that we showed in the previous presentation. It was the one I mentioned at the beginning. So 90% headcount reduction for this government department. So we had to really rework their IT service management. And at the heart of every single ITSM process is configuration, right? Tagging the work allows you to automate stuff. So we couldn't have fulfillers going into records and updating things, just because they received an update from someone else and need to pass it on to the customer. That's a complete no-go when you've got a 90% headcount reduction. You need the system to do that for you. So we had to get a CMDB in to drive that work, and we had to do it quickly. Right, previous to this, they'd spent 3 years with 10,000 CIs and a config team of 3 that were just, their sole job was to basically work through putting relationships in and trying to get a clean model out. And it failed. They didn't manage to get there in the end. But within a couple of weeks, we were able to stand this model up. We basically used the operating model that was already part of the project, so it was already agreed, put that in, built this hierarchy of ownership, got the owners then to take on responsibility for populating the attributes and adding the technical CIs and adding any dependencies. And of course, they were incentivized to do this because this was kind of driving all the SLAs out of system. And if you put a dependency in, it means you can then, if that service goes down, you then don't get pinged on your SLA because you've shown a dependency. And all work was routed as well. So, and this was one of the big wins really on this project, that day one we went live, there were no major issues with the system, and no one had to assign work anymore. Like, there's no changing of assignment groups to pass a ticket around. People updated the CI and work moved, and no one noticed at all. There were absolutely no feedback, no comments, and everyone used the system as we expected. So this is intuitive if you get there, and I'll show you in the next slide how we make it intuitive. Because as many of you will know, looking at, if you've not got particularly good CMDBs, exposing that to the end user is a real no-no, right? But yet we're saying as part of this presentation that you should be able to expose your CMDB to the end user. And with this sort of hierarchy in place, you can expose it to the end user. And it's a good thing to do, because now you've got an agreed org chart at the top. So the users know that because they've been schooled in that throughout the rest of the organization. They know who their managers are, they know who the team leads are, they know roughly where they sit. So you can expose that, and it does make some sense. Now, what you want to do is get users to tag everything. So this is unstructured stuff like an incident. Get them to tag it with something when they come into the service portal, or if you're on the phone with them, just tag it with something. Doesn't matter if it's right. This is a key point. So users will get stuff wrong. That's great. That's fine. We know that. They're not experts. But then it will go to triage, and triage team will know more, and they'll put it to the right place. And then on resolution, you can get the actual proper CI out and get your support teams to be schooled in, yes, it was with this load balancer, because the user's not going to know that. But a couple of reasons why you'd want to get the users to put it in the first place. So one, because it's interesting to know what they think the problem's with. Everybody's got a different view on that, but it can be quite helpful to have that information. Secondly, so that everything's tagged. So you've got no working system that doesn't have some context. That's good, because if things get stuck for a while, you know where it's with. And the third one is around overriding triage as well. So if you've got a project within your organization that's taken responsibility for a new service, you can override the service desk as the triage for that and send it direct to the project hypercare team, which can be really helpful if the service desk hasn't been trained yet. So you can get stuff to where it needs to go faster. So that is cool. And I'll show you how the physical sort of implementation of that example on the next slide. So this is what it looks like in practice. So one option that it can look like in practice to allow users to interface. So this is kind of designed from UX principles. So it's basically saying that users want to they're either going to search or they're going to browse to find what their issues with. So most of them will just type in, oh, it's with Excel, or it's with Outlook, or it's an email, or something else. Great, type it in, have some synonyms on the CIs, and then you should be good. They can find it. Or if they don't really know, just pick something in that tree. Right? And as I say, you just need to get it to the approximate place. And you can see laptop there, it's down in the hierarchy tree. And you kind of know where laptop sits because of the context in the tree. So that can be one help. If you don't want to do that, then you can also just use standard traditional fields and add some logic around creating dependencies between them. But this is just a bit of a nicer way in for users. So that gives it a good starting point. Cool.
So I mentioned earlier around enterprise service management is dimensional. And if you draw the relationships between those dimensions, it's a way to architect your CMDB. So therefore, your CMDB is dimensional. Traditionally, you've got 4 dimensional models. You have the dependency model. So these are relationships such as runs on, depends on, consumed by. So what depends on something else in order to function. And then you've got ownership. So this drives your accountability. Who's responsible, who's accountable for a service. And then you've got the environment equivalent relationship. So this is the environment equivalent and really useful for example, your DevOps teams. If they're releasing something, they have a path to production from a lower environment up to a higher environment. And then you've got your abstraction models. So an example of this would be a program. So programs are in place in order to introduce change within the organization, but programs aren't going to own everything. They'll own something up to a certain point, up into the point where it becomes operationalized and comes into the business.
Cool. So as Darren mentioned, you've got these 4 types of relationship there, which are useful to know. And what we want to do is start modeling the organization based on that. So we said there's a link between entity and asset. So many of you are familiar with, sort of likes of ServiceNow and products such as that, you'll know that there is configuration gets discovered, typically for IT stuff, because you don't want to be going around with a checklist for 1,000 internet things. So you can just put a probe out onto the network and find all this stuff. But of course, if it was facilities, desks and chairs, you're in there, you'd have to go to the clipboard or something similar, maybe RFID tags or something is the modern way of doing it. But you can discover that stuff, right? So you bring it all in. Then what you want to try and do is map dependencies. And again, there are automated tools that can help you with this and products out there. But what these products can't do is give you your entities because, of course, that's yours. That's your organization structure. So you need to put that in place. And the art really then is modeling those entities to make sure they reflect your organization and go down to enough detail to allow you to route work effectively and provide the ownership. And then what you want to do is match, which is take the entity model that you've got there, all your services and the breakdown, and match it with that configuration that you've discovered and mapped. So you're doing modeling at the top, matching in the middle down to your service maps and assets. And the example on the right here is one for property one, so not IT at all. Right, we've got that building heating and cooling system that I mentioned, service that I mentioned earlier. Now, number of assumptions on here, right? This is going to be different for every organization, but this organization here has chosen to, they've got a floor and zone aware system that's probably owned by IT, not shown. And that's how it's configured. And they've got a floor manager owning the floor, and then they've got zone leads owning the configuration, the temperature basically of each zone. And we can see the dependency down here onto these 3 assets at the bottom. So they've got a multi-unit owning 3 and 4, that zone 3 and 4 are dependent on, and then zone 1 and 2 have each got their own. Now, this interestingly shows that facilities itself owns the assets because that's where it goes on the balance sheet. And then the zone leads are dependent on those assets being available. So little note on kind of product architectures, and we've used ServiceNow as an example because it's kind of the market leader in this space. So what we've got on the left, we talked about a logical model derived from first principles service management. And so you take that and you want to then model your organization. So that is not something like a product data model like CSDM. So CSDM is the physical implementation of your logical model. You shouldn't get the two confused. It's quite important that I think in these things they're very good principles when they're set up, but actually like the community can start to take them and sell them as things that they aren't. And what this isn't is the way of modeling your organization, right? The way you do that is using your org chart, not model that you've already got. This is a physical data model for how to put the data in to then get the right functionality out of the product. So it's how the products within a platform like ServiceNow hang together. And it's a really important distinction because what you want to do and what we've had success doing is basically ignore that in the first instance, right? You would never jump to tooling and solution before getting your business requirements. So the same is true here, right? Do your modeling first. Just model it however you want. And then what you can do is you'll find that it will sort of map into it will map in quite easily into something like the CSDM. And we had good success at one organization, government organization recently, where they managed to, within a couple of hours, we'd modeled up the logical, and then mapping was a relatively trivial exercise. And Darren was able to get that into ServiceNow within a day or so. And we'll show you one of the resulting models, or a similar one, I think, further on in the pack. So I hope that's helpful distinction, just kind of how things like CSDM can play into this and where to sort of keep the boundaries. Cool. Sorry, one more point while I remember on that previous. You'll notice that CSDM itself is a fragmented model because it's trying to bring the products together. So we mentioned before the key is to bring entity down to asset, right? So our suggestion from ASM perspective is focus on that first. But what these other stuff are, Darren mentioned earlier, there's abstractions as well. So this is what things like capabilities and business applications are. They're abstractions if you haven't built your organization around specific teams that own capabilities and specific teams that own business apps, then they're an abstract view on the core ownership classes. So it's worth bearing that in mind, because if they're not part of the core classes, it means they're abstraction, and abstractions need manual maintenance. So just to be aware of that as you're assessing whether to proceed. They do provide good useful functionality, and you'll see business applications are good for architects and things for modeling the life cycle of those apps and doing maintenance schedules and the architecture roadmap. But it does come at a cost, so you need to weigh up whether you're going to get the benefit of that. Cool. Sorry.
Oh, good, Mark. Thank you. So just coming to our first example, this is a partial model of the ITT department. And so what we can see here, if we look at, first of all, in the center, we've got a technical service of email, and that owns Exchange on-prem. So our red line is our ownership, and our green dot lines is dependency, as an example. So Exchange the email offers Exchange on-prem, and then Exchange on-prem then owns a dynamic CI group of a cluster of servers. And again, for those without a ServiceNow product background, a dynamic CI group is essentially just a group which enables the clustering of CIs based on conditions. So this example here is our Windows servers. So in a scenario, if one of these Windows servers was to go down or be degraded, what we have the capability here is seeing who is responsible for actually fixing this issue. So we can see Exchange on-prem, they'll have their support group, and then we can automatically assign an incident to go to that group. But if you notice that you've got an owner of the tech service here, and they are email and archiving. So this is a business service. So what we're able to do here is from the infrastructure, translate a server going down, like an IT issue, to a business and what it actually means for the business. So we have the capability of being able to get it to the right person to fix it, but also notify the relevant people in the business, just in case they need to also take any actions as well. And by modeling it in such a way, we're able to achieve it automatically. And then we have a next example here. So this is a retail organization. So we managed to map the whole organization. And we did this just in a couple of days, like Mark explained, from an Excel sheet exercise, really. This is, bear in mind, it's not an example of a set and forget. Organizations change, services change, so you're able to continually change and maintain it. And we'll also talk about how it's easily maintained as well as we go through. But if we just zoom in onto this section, imagine you walk in store into a supermarket, and then you have a checkout lane. Imagine your checkout lane as a service. So it offers FPOS, the FPOS PIN pad, it offers the scanners, it offers printers. And then under the printer service offering, you then have your actual devices. Now we can really start to see how powerful this could be, because essentially what we can derive from a model such as this is the overall health of your service. You can correlate impact. So if the printer goes down, what impact does that have to the checkout, and what impact does it have to the store? You can also define criticality. So if checkouts are critical to your business, then you want to define that against a service. It is critical. You can also define SLAs. So, for example, because it's a critical service, you need to be able to put a service level agreement. This needs to be fixed in X amount of time, and if it isn't, then it's going to cause big issues. And you can also, with maturity, correlate cost as well. So we were talking about that every service has a value, assets put into the organization, and then so therefore a service has a value. So we can now correlate value to a service, and how much does it cost me to run it? So yeah, really powerful stuff. So what does this look like functionally? So this is about making maintenance easier, as I just mentioned. So if we, on the top left here, if we agree on a standard class, you can standardize a service model in the org chart. So what that means is if you were to model your entire organization, then you could standardize it. So if you were to set up service A, it would look similar to service B, and especially in particular areas. And we'll go into why that is really useful as we go on. But how do you make it easy to maintain the soft attributes down the ownership chain? So this is what we're seeing on the right-hand side here. So the soft attributes, which I mean by change group, support group, and what we've been able to achieve is an inheritance. So people who with programming backgrounds will be familiar with this. So in this example here, you've got Office 365 and then the service offering of email. That support group might be the same. The service offering of email has inherited Office 365. However, you still want control at a more granular level. So if you want more granularity, then, for example, the tech service of Exchange administration, that will be a different support group. So you can override this attribute. But by having this functionality, especially when first implementing the CMDB to maintain the soft attributes, you can start right in the areas right at the top and do a force cascade down to all the CIs, all of the layers down to the bottom, and then go back over it and then update it to a more accurate, more granular level. And that's what we've done before in order to be able to establish the soft attributes really quickly in implementations. So what does that look like practically? How do you do this? So again, with the ServiceNow platform in mind, we can add an owned by parent. So essentially this is a reference, it's an attribute, which essentially that's where you put in the owning parent of that service. And that's got quite a few implications. You could use that for dot walking. So imagine how powerful you can make your reporting. You can just dot walk from any record really to the service. And then you've got the relationship. So you can add a business rule in the background, which can automatically populate the ownership relationship when that attribute has been updated. And then again, this has got its own connotation. So as I mentioned before, you can use that for force cascading. And then if you think about the relationship view on CIs, that map view, well, then you can see the ownership relationship in there as well, which again, would be in line with the entity, i.e., your services of your organization. You've got so I mentioned non-discoverable inheritance, and then we've also got standard class. So there's a couple of benefits around this, and we'll go in a bit further detail as we go along. But this is really useful for sorry, my battery's just about to run out on my laptop. I do have my charger, but I will plug it in. I'll just finish this slide in a second.
Go for it.
About a 5-minute break in a moment, but I'll just finish this. So we got the standard class. So that could be used for conflict checking because it's a bit further up, and but Mark will explain a bit of detail in a moment. And then of course you've got dependencies and other relationships. So in regards to the ServiceNow platform, nothing's changed here. So all of this, you still have its functions. We talked about the dimensions of the CMDB and those types of relationships we mentioned before. They're all important. They all coexist. So dependencies and other relationships, they carry on as they are. So we talked, I know we talked a lot. It's a lot to take in. And I'm really glad we're recording this, and you'll get an on-demand version of this session afterwards. Please watch it and rewatch it because there is a lot to take in. We're going to have a 5-minute break. So let's come back. So it's 12:37. Let's come back in just before 1:45. Is that all right? Let's just round it up. 12:45.
All right, let's pause the record. Okay, thanks and welcome back. Darren, we've got a question in the chat, which I thought was quite a good one. So Anonymous was asking, generally, how long would a CMDB implementation take from start to finish?
It's a good question.
Depends.
So, I suppose it depends. It's not, I can't give an answer of 3 days, 5 minutes, 46 seconds, unfortunately, but it depends, and it depends on the approach and what's in scope. So if we were to look at something like this, what we find helpful is approaching it by modeling, because we want to make it valuable and make it make sense to an organization. We want the people who you're implementing with to understand it. What's the output? Again, we mentioned right at the beginning that it can become a very technical exercise, and there is an element of definitely an element of deep technical exercise to it, because you're discovering networks, and then you're going to be discussing with your network teams. You're going to be talking servers and then cloud structures, and it can get quite complex. But if we just focus on what needs to be done in order to make sense for the business, these things can happen, these conversations can happen, but essentially your IT lead team are able to understand, okay, what needs to be done, and then what needs to be done, and why do we need to do this? And then your end users who are actually in the service management process also gaining the benefits. So this is when we start looking at these things, it can become easier because it just makes sense. And so I just elaborate a bit further there. So when it comes to what you need to do within ServiceNow to set up discovery, then there's a stage of things, and you've got best practice recommendations for implementation from a ServiceNow perspective, such as your credentials, your mid servers, your IP ranges. I mean, so this can range from anywhere from 3 weeks to 10 weeks, and that very much depends on what that scope is. Yeah.
Cool. I think Craig has a good point of, is it ever finished? I guess that's right. You've got to kind of phase it. So for ITSM, you just need the entity model in there. You just need the services, and that is it for ITSM, really. In order to manage incidents, in order to service requests, you just need to put your services in. Right, so that's the absolute bare minimum for CMDB. You can then tag all your work to it. It'll work. Right, and as Darren was referring, discovery and things like that allows you a lot more rich functionality to tag in servers and correlate events and all the other sort of good stuff that you'll see down the tree. There's no need for a small organization to go to that level unless you have the benefits for it. So if you just want to put a few services in, you can do that within half an hour if you wanted to put 5 services in, tag all your instance to it, job done. Or you can take a long process of get your services in, then go through the discovery piece, do the service mapping, and keep improving from there. So it's sort of, you know, anything from a couple of days through to you know, weeks or maybe longer. Maybe it's some clients go with a revolving iterative journey for service mapping. As we say, just add the detail when you need it, start with your critical services and then roll out from there. Cool. I hope that helps.
Yeah. That's,
cool.
Okay. I like your comment.
How long would it take you to do the CMDB for by the government?
Can you repeat the question, Darren?
Yeah. So how long did it take us to implement the CMDB with the government example that we were discussing? So that project involved a few modules around ServiceNow, and so the CMDB in terms of the uplift and putting the foundation in there, we're probably looking at about a month, I would say, around there. Yeah.
Just the question again, Darren.
Oh yeah. So how many staff did we have working on that full time? So from our side, we probably had maybe two key people, and then from their side, maybe about another 2 key people. You've got your analysts who would go through all of that good stuff like data, staleness, compliance, setting up the configuration for the compliance rules around it. And then you've also got another senior person on the tools in order to flesh out the functionality. But then, of course, on their side, you've got, it was part of a project manager, but you've also got senior stakeholder as well, who owns the process, who will ultimately carrying the bag. But then you've also got to realize that you've got to have conversations with your network team. So even though they're not necessarily directly part of the project, the conversations are important because they're people who own the things that need to be discovered. If you're getting error messages, why is it due to credentials? Where the credentials held? They're those engineering teams. They need to be involved in the conversations as well. Yeah. Cool.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
All right. I think we're into service management, Darren. Cool. So we've looked at the modeling of a CMDB, and we've looked at sort of the basic building blocks you'd need with a, what changes to make, simple field changes to make to the CIs. Now let's have a look at some of the implications for that. And we'll start with sort of the ITSM ones, because not only are these implications, but they're also the way, as Darren mentioned at the beginning, to get your feedback loop going. So if you don't use the CMDB, if you don't correlate and make it the what to the how of service management, then you're not going to get any value from it. No one's going to bother ever updating the CMDB because they don't get any benefit from it. So there's a few kind of things that we can do, and I really wanted you to focus here on what the ownership model gives you that traditional models wouldn't. And we'll start with change, which is a good one. So you want to obviously detect conflicts between changes. That's part of a good change control. You don't want to do 2 things on the same server at the same night. So with traditional CMDB that's a web of dependencies, it's quite hard to do that. So certain tools such as ServiceNow that have an inbuilt conflict checker, and it can hop through some of those dependencies, and you set a limit on that. Otherwise, everything's dependent on everything if you allow it to do unlimited hops. So normally it's like a couple of hops that allow. But you don't know how complex your tree is. Do you really know from that model on the left whether change 1, change 3, or change 2 conflicts? You kind of don't really. You're a bit reliant on how those dependencies are set up. But if we shift across to the right, here's the ownership tree, and we've tagged the changes against different things. We can tag a change against anything, right? Some people might, they might be doing a change on a load balancer, some might be doing on an application service, some might tag it on the business service. What we're saying is bring them all up and get the change on the standard class. So Darren was mentioning about those attributes on the CI before. They are that you have the parent on there. But then what we also get is a scheduled job to run through the CMDB, evaluate the ownership tree, and populate standard classes as attributes onto the CIs. This is good for performance. So it basically means E, F, G, and H all have the conflict check standard class listed as an attribute on the CI. So it means you can report on it really easily. You don't have to evaluate that ownership tree every time. Right, so that's a really good thing to do. You can, you know, decouple it, put it as a batch job, run it overnight, and then it will work from there. So now we've got every change tagged at a single standard class layer. And standard classes are great because you're basically enforcing some integrity there. So 100% of the organization is represented at that standard class layer. And you kind of see this, you know, so you might have a chief executive, you may have some, you know, if you're in government, you'll have like deputy commissioners that sit underneath. You might have 6. Those 6 people are at a standard class level. They represent the whole organization. So that's one standard class. Then you might have an org unit class underneath, and it's very dependent on your org model. So anyway, you can now tag all changes, and the owner of D will know exactly what's going on and whether D, F, and G's, you know, change 1, 2, and 3 conflict or not. And then you can use the out-of-the-box conflict checker as well. But this is quite a good way of surfacing those conflicts and giving it to the owner who's accountable. Cool. Next one. Cool. And I can talk on this for quite a while, Darren. So just let me know the SLA is about to breach or something if we're getting shorter time. All right. So, yeah, I hope this is interesting because we don't really usually get the opportunity to go into the ITSM stuff, and this is quite a good opportunity. So, change. A good opportunity to automate here using CI. So your standard change goes through that life cycle at the top in the dark green. But what we can do now is, because we've got a standard class and we shouldn't have too many of those, you can tag them with the reviewers, the change authority, change coordinator, and even like informed groups as well. So you manage your stakeholders through the CI. So if you relate all this information to that CI, it means as the change goes through, you can have different workflows, you can send it to different reviewers. You don't have a change coordinator who has to go in manually, read from a spreadsheet and manually add people as approvers and things. So, you know, again, if you want to automate, this is one way of doing it. I won't go into the 7 factors for change assessment, but that is another interesting story for another day. Okay, next one. So incidents and issues and incidents. So you might think, incidents, easy. But actually, there's a lot of nuance here. And yeah, quite a bit of discussion time could be spent on this. So the main point really from the CI perspective is that we've talked about driving triage before and driving support groups from the CI. So you can use a bit of a life cycle and have all these groups listed on the CI and use the life cycle of the incident to try and to drive which group it should go to. Now there's ways and means of doing this. And depending on your organization, you'll want to use more or less of this. For those who joined me on Wednesday would have seen that our Roman store had the concept of an issue created by a customer. Right, so the customer had an interaction and they raised an issue about something. And then behind the scenes, in order to deliver it, the provider had an incident there that was the fire's gone out, because there could be lots of customers coming in with the same, you know, my food's cold issue, lots of those. And then there's one incident, which is a fire gone out. So there is a many-to-one relationship. Now, I'm not saying that you necessarily have to put this in your organization, but it's just worth noting that the concept does exist. And what it means is you'll end up with a proliferation of incidents that you have to create dependencies if you don't do this. So the trick for, if you want to split it, I would suggest is, 1, that you have that many-to-one happening frequently, and 2, if you've got a complex triage process, that would be the time to sort of push to this way. If you just got a simple process, just keep it as 1, right? And the whole flow is restoring service at the end of the day. So there's a bit of that. There's a bit of flexibility there. The other thing is, what's the boundary between the issue and the incident? So the customer's bit and the actual technical resolution bit. And it's often, we kind of say it's the acceptance. So it's the act of accepting an incident or accepting an issue into an incident. And that's quite important from a service level perspective. And it's not really called out too much in the literature. You're kind of saying at this point that we are accepting that this is an actual degradation of service and we have breached our service level agreement. Therefore, our support SLA applies. So you could possibly, I think most organizations, the service desk is kind of given that role. As an act of triaging it, they accept it as well. But you could put it down to the support group and get them to sort of second triage it as well in order to do that. So there are options around that depending on your organization. But yeah, from a CI perspective, we know that we tagged it at the beginning, we get triage to update it, and then we solve it at resolution again at the end. There is a little bit more you can do on this from a workflow automation perspective. So actually, no one needs to update a state on an instance at all, right? You can take it as an event-driven lifecycle. So when a record's created, it's new, it will go to triage. The moment the triage group updates the CI, that is the act of triaging it. They've said where it needs to go. Okay, so I'm assuming they've checked the priority and they've checked that the customer's got the right data on it. But then when they've done that, they will move the CI to what it is. And that can be an option to then say, now it's triaged and possibly even accepted at that point as well. Then once it's with the support team, you can then have it assigned, and you could give some granularity on the status for that. So it's now been accepted, it's been assigned. And then when it's the post of the first update, then it can go to in progress. So you can use that as a little bit to guide your workflow. This is more organic status updates for the user, and you can drive SLAs off that as well for each one to measure the team's performance. Because we had an interesting use case where it went up to with partner as well. So they had a support partner managing. Again, you could put that on the CI and put some sort of custom workflow around that if you needed to have that as part of your process as well. So this is, all how to help automate stuff. A little bit off topic, but yeah, sort of might be interesting. Next one. Yes, so knowledge as well. And this is where we bring in contextual search to ITSM and service management in general. It's a very powerful tool. You're seeing a little bit come in with ServiceNow and the agent workspace and the AI search tools. But sort of the next level for this is really to start using CI as your primary search and then short description as your ordering. Because at the moment, you're very dependent on what that short description is, and you're very dependent on the AI picking up on that, and it's not going to be perfect. But if you have tagged all your requests, cat items, every form that you need the user to fill in has got a service tagged against it. Every single bit of knowledge has got the service tagged, and your service info from the design pack, if you've got that in there as well, if you've got all your architecture docs, good reference, then you can now return that list and then order it. So it means they can access whatever they want, and you're not dependent on the search returning the right results. Now with this search, you can now give one-click actions. So with a request, so let the triage or the fulfiller in the incident see these search results and let them click. They can choose that I want to return a request. So that request is usually the first one you want to do. If there's a form to fill in that the user needs to fill in, send the form back, attach and resolve, close the incident, open up send the user a mail with a cat item in. Or there's some knowledge. So here, go follow this guide, attach and resolve again. I mean, you can also do attach as another option, and then the user can come back. But attach and resolve can be okay because the user will get the option to agree to complete or reopen as well in an ideal workflow. So they can just reopen it if they don't think that was a good option. And that way you're not running any SLA clocks and the user gets what they need. You can also create dependencies as well between incidents and changes, and that's very powerful, as we'll show on the next slide. Next one. Excellent. So this is what it looks like in practice. So this was an app called YDS OneSearch, I think, that was used on the store, but ServiceNow's capability is also pretty close as well these days. So here you can see on knowledge was being returned. I don't think we had request items on this one. That request would sit first, but then knowledge, you've got to attach and auto resolve the record. And then with incidents, you've got to set it as a partial dependency or set it as a total dependency. So a total dependency will close immediately on closure of the other incident, whereas a partial will just notify you. And that dependency functionality is really easy, simple to implement. It's a one many-to-many table, which has parent and relationship, and then a business rule that runs through and closes it. Now you imagine that you can start chaining changes, other incidents, problems, all sorts of stuff off of this. So the user just doesn't need to deal with it anymore. You don't need someone to wait for that change to be, and then they need to come back to the incident and then type the update and send it to the customer. No, all of that stuff will just flow through. This is how to really start to automate your CMDB. And CI is key to getting those right search results, which is the prereq for doing this. So, powerful sort of advanced capability here that we're kind of making available. All right, let's go for the next one. I think this is my final one. So another thing that comes up with ITSM is users get a little bit confused and sort of push back a little bit because they think they've got to work in a single record type. You hear this about issue and incident, for instance. Oh, I only work in incidents, or oh, I only work in issues, or that kind of thing. And it's actually not the correct approach. What they're missing is a UI miss, basically, if they're saying that, because these are aspects of work at the end of the day. The record is just a way of trying to codify that in system. So you want people to select the appropriate aspect of work because an incident is set up for unstructured resolution of a degradation of service. A problem will provide you with a structured problem-solving analysis workflow. A change will give you an approvals workflow. A request will capture structured data and send it through the appropriate lifecycle, and so on. You want people to work in the right record, but that means you need to make it so they work in any record, which means you need a universal work list. So you need to basically give people, here are your tasks to do, and it contains incidents, problems, changes, requests, releases, events, whatever. Right? Anything that's in their queue needs to be in that list, regardless of record type. And that's how to start getting them to do everything. And then the other thing you need to do is add the concept of active work as well. So if stuff is, as we said before, if you've got a total dependency on something else, now that record's not active anymore. So you need to set it to a pending state or stick a flag on it or something. You just want it out of their queue so they don't get bothered by it being there and think they need to keep constantly updating it. So these are, quite a few sort of ITSM sort of enhancements that we can make off the back of this. I'll let Darren go through to the future state implications and reporting. Cool.
So I'll just thanks, Mark. So I'll just skip over a couple of these things because we've already talked about them a lot as we've gone through. So we've mentioned auto assignment because you now have those attributes against services and service offerings. You're able to use those attributes to populate your processes, such as incident, who should it go to, change, who are the approvers of it. So criticality, so on and so forth. There's a lot of good stuff that you can get from that. Effective asset management. So we've already talked about this because we now have the CI correlated to the asset. The asset has value. You can correlate that financial information up to the service and understand the true value of that service. And then if we mentioned service design, this is all about service design. Talk about service health. So this is a good one because what is service health? I suppose it can be answered with a series of questions. So how available has my service been? Has there been any customer impact and why? We can then start, because we're correlating records to our service in a business sense, we're able to understand what incidents have gone against it. Have we had any outages? Have we had any degradations, changes? And we talked about change impact. Have we had any changes that have gone through as impacted a service? So we can get what ultimately makes my service healthy and available. We talked about SLA negotiations. So now we have the visibility in the organization of the criticality of the service. Now we can start adding SLAs around it because we know it needs to be available. So therefore, if it's broken, how quickly does it need to be fixed? And then cost to serve. So this is really soaring here. We now have the capability to be able to track labor and time. And if you then correlate that to the service, well, then you can now start seeing, well, what does my service cost me? And I can imagine across any kind of industry, I suppose there's a lot of organizations that will find that really, really useful. And I wanted to just show this very quickly. I know, sorry, the writing's really small in this slide, but I just threw it in there because I think it's really important to, especially from people who are already on the ServiceNow platform, and again, looking to uplift their CMDB or do a new implementation, what can it unlock on the platform? Because essentially the CMDB is the center for all of the surrounding modules. We talked a lot about ITSM, but governance, risk, and compliance. If you've now got ownership against your services, which now you can in turn have ownership against your CIs. If you have true ups, I don't know how many times a year, but if someone comes in asking questions such as who should I speak to about X, Y, and Z, now you have the answers. And if we also have a look at application portfolio management, and we start talking about capabilities. So what's your organizational strategy? How do you get there? What capability do you have in order to achieve it? What services are underpinning your capabilities? and then what applications are underpinning your services. So you can really start to take a stepping stone into these areas, including digital portfolio management. We've talked about standard classes. Now you could use this to standardize your taxonomy of your organization. So all of that change that's coming in from projects that are being stood up, you're able to now see all of that information, linking it to the financials, linking it to your services, which then you can link your assets and your applications, going up to your capability. So all of these things, I mean, it's really powerful stuff. But if you take all of this together and you really take a step back, so what are we now seeing? We're seeing a true picture of your organization, so that your CTO is able to answer questions such as, how responsive are we in downtime? Is your data secure? How compliant are we? How are we managing our technology-related risks, and what steps are we taking to mitigate potential security threats and data breaches? There's a lot of questions that your CTO will ask, and an answer can be found within a good foundation CMDB. And now I just wanted to show you this. So this could be a good example of how reporting could look. So again, referring to the ServiceNow platform, not using performance analytics here, but even out-of-the-box basic reporting functionality, through dot walking, we're able to find information to service owners. So how many incidents are impacting my services? And then you could then stack that by service offerings. You've also got potential security incidents impacting my services, SLA breaches against my services. So because it makes business sense to me now, what are my critical services which I need to provide to my customer? And if I'm breaching those SLAs, well, what impact is that having to my customer? And if you have any correlation data with degraded services or customer dissatisfaction, well, yeah, you can definitely correlate these two. So, it just feels that we rushed through that, Mark. I hope everyone could take that in. Maybe I'll just take a moment to pause.
Yep. Any questions?
Does anybody have any questions?
Dot walking.
Ah, yes.
Just repeat the question, Darren.
Dot walking. That was a statement more than a question. So I
What is it?
What is it?
So, so dot walking, ServiceNow terminology. So basically, ServiceNow as a platform, you can imagine it's built up of multiple different tables and multi-relational. I mean, there's a lot more than that, but essentially that's dumbing down in the background. That's what's going on. But you have data on one table, which you can refer to another table. And rather than having to keep the same information in two separate tables, you can use each other to pull information in order to provide an output. How do you do that though? So basically, let's imagine an Excel spreadsheet, and then you have a cell which is referencing another Excel spreadsheet. You can dot walk to that one and pull that information through. So that's in simple terms, dot walking. I'm sure maybe someone in the ServiceNow community might have a better one, but that
So it could be
a floating point. That's okay. It could be a floating point. Yeah, could be a floating point.
Yeah.
We got another question in the room. Hey, Mark.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, with the fast progress and development of the AI and ChatGPT and that sort of thing, does that have any impact on your, like, I mean, could be completely irrelevant. So I'm just curious.
So the question. Just want to play the question back to make sure I understand it. So your question is the implications of AI and ChatGPT to the platform, or to, well, there's a lot that we can read about the ServiceNow platform, and they are moving at a lightning fast speed when it comes to this space. And I'm not aware of a lot of it, but let's say the CMDB. We can do a bit of a thought experiment because you can integrate ServiceNow with OpenAI. essentially you just do an API, a REST call, pull back the information, and then the information you get back, you can do whatever you want with that within the platform. So let's say a thought experiment, if you were to build a functionality where you could ask OpenAI, hey, give me typical services of part of this industry, this organization within New Zealand, down to this department, tell me all the services that could be made up. And you could then in turn come back with you with a response and then populate those services for you. And then in turn after that, you could then ask, okay, from these services, what kind of service offerings do I have? And then it can populate all of those service offerings for you. I mean, ideally you would want it, you would want it to reflect your organization. So don't know what kind of answers you're going to come back, but you can imagine how powerful you could make, building out your services in an app quite easily. I hope that answers your question, but there's a lot of implications in the AI space.
Yeah, just don't use it as a magic bullet. It's you'll never replace the value of having a good structured data set. So the fact that we're correlating everything to CI and stuff, that's good underlying data hygiene and practice there. So you could be able to use ChatGPT and other AI models as an augmentation to that, and they'll super enhance the capability. But if they don't have that underlying data structure to rely on, like the question bank, the training material, basically that they need to use, then you won't get the benefit from it. So then they're not the panacea, as it were. Yeah, but they can definitely help.
Yeah, I mean, the exercise I just described probably might be a fun exercise. It'd be a lot of work in that to get it right. But yeah. Yeah,
it can help guide your thinking, and as Darren, as you were saying, yeah, if you just want a bit of advice from it around like what services should I offer, but that kind of implies that you wouldn't already have an op model already. So if you already have one, then use it. If you want to design your op model, then yeah, absolutely. Get some advice from there around what the people are doing, and it can draw on the whole internet, which is cool. And thanks, Craig, for your great feedback on the chat there.
So I just read out Craig's feedback for the room. So we have. Okay. Yeah. No.
Yeah. He just says thanks for sharing the valuable insight with the wider community.
Oh, yeah.
That's cool.
Great.
Thank you.
Any other questions from the room?
We got a hand up from Kyan. Was that right, Kyan? No, it's okay. It's all right. I don't think there's any other questions in there.
Yeah. No. Go another one from the room.
I'm just wondering, because when you talk about that model is for all, but then does it involve any different kind of level of access level of authority? Like people maybe have input this apply to all, but then not everybody can actually get all the information to get an output to know what's going on. Do you actually have that sort of a separate, like US government or some FBIs? They have different level of access.
So you, I suppose you're saying this, what we talked about, is applying to all, but you're saying not everybody's going to be able to have the access to be able to the output, to be able to give the input. So like, I suppose, are we talking about who has access to the data, who has access to the CMDB, what's been created? So you would want to, there's definitely governance and control that you want to put around that and expose it to people who it's relevant to. I suppose it comes down to relevance. People who are in your customer workflows, and that could be anybody on the streets using a form that's exposed to them who needs something and then presents either a request or raises an incident. They won't have any idea what CMDB is. They won't really care, but they may be using the data because they might be choosing from an offering in that form, i.e. an offering being my printer is broken. So that could be data coming from the CMDB. So I think the short answer is expose it to the relevant people and definitely put control around who can write to it, who can edit.
But I guess the direction of travel is it will be a lot more open than it has been in the past, especially those logical layers, because they are just the business there's nothing confidential about those to people within the organization because they already know that stuff already because it's published. So yeah, just the ability to tag stuff and see data on aggregate, as Darren says, it's what's relevant basically, is what you publish. And the idea is that service owners should be in there with pretty much full access to be able to edit what they want. You may apply some more controls around that, but the idea is that if you're a service owner, you control that data, you control what's underneath in those CIs in order to effectively allow you to run that service. So yeah, it's sort of, that's how the delegation goes, if you will. And once you distribute the ownership, you make the problem a lot simpler, and you put the ownership with the accountability and the incentives to do the right thing. So, they want that service to be delivered, they're held accountable for it, so they're going to make sure it's up to date. Hope that helps.
So another question from the room, Matt, sorry.
Just
Yeah.
for security orchestration, automation tool.
Yeah, yes, it is. Yes, so security orchestration, automation response. We abbreviated that on a slide. Yeah.
Cool. We got a couple of questions on the chat as well. Were there any more in the room?
Any other questions?
That's all good. Sorry, I thought there was two. So we have, is there an example of cloud services as CI versus traditional physical hardware? And is the CI capable of automatic updates and patching? Ooh, okay, we'll take them one at a time. So example of cloud services as CIs. Yeah, absolutely. The physical versus cloud there's no difference at all. They're all CIs at the end of the day. How you get the data changes a little bit. So on-premise, you'd be forced to run discovery tools on there, whereas cloud, you kind of imagine that AWS, Google, Azure, they all actually know the config already, right? They've already config mapped it because they've got to know what's on their estate. So you can kind of pipe into their feeds as well. So you've got a couple of additional options. If you're using ServiceNow, I think there's service graph connectors that connect up, or you could just install Discovery and run it from on the network. I mean, things like Lambda functions and sort of the cloud compute that isn't traditional servers, they're a little bit more challenging. But again, they would be reflected within the hosting provider's CMDB config stream that you would tap into. I guess I hope that answers that. So in the capable of automatic updates and patching, you would need additional software for that. But this brings us more into SecOps, kind of security operations and vulnerability sort of response area. So the idea being that you would discover and on your return, you would identify the software versions, run that against a master list and go, oh, this is out of date, or there's a patch available for this. And then, yeah, you could orchestrate off the back of that. If you had a tool like SCCM, Microsoft, software deployment tool, you could then get that to run the patch off it. That's a whole layer of automated ops that sits on top of this. I mean, CMDB will absolutely help you get there. You can't do it without it, but yeah, it's there's work involved to get that done, and you got to weigh that against the cost of just having a team there that can do it intelligently as humans. So cool. Hope that helps. One more around if I want a career in anything to add on that one, Darren?
No, thank you.
All good. And if I want a career in databases, what's the degree or best other learning platforms? Ooh, so. Go on, I'm biased. I have my answer. But Darren, do you want to take this one first?
I was just maybe as a quick plug. I mean, we talked a lot about ServiceNow. It's a massive growing platform, and we actually have a cadetship at Deloitte. So maybe it could be a quick plug to that. We can send some details through. But if you were to Google Deloitte in ServiceNow cadetship, then that might give you a bit of background there.
Cool. And I wasn't. Yeah, so I was also going to say for degrees, what degree wise, I mean, you've got your computer science kind of degree, or I just say, general curiosity kind of stuff. Like I found physics incredibly useful for this. It's really applicable because it's all about the natural world. And if we do go down the sort of more ASM route of modeling, then having that broader appreciation of other stuff, electronics, and just general curiosity for things is quite useful. I mean, today it's everything's moving higher level, but to have that sort of fundamental appreciation of what's going on, it can never hurt. Cool. So I guess yeah, probably in New Zealand it matters a bit more than where I come from in the UK, where it doesn't matter what degree you have. But yeah, here it's more probably computer science, I would have thought would be the route to get taken seriously. But yeah, if I receive a physicist, I will definitely take them seriously. So that's good.
And as well, there's a lot of the way the world is moving out to cloud. There's a lot of online courses around AWS and cloud platforms, which is really good learning material in the space.
Cool, yeah.
So another question from the room.
Yeah, I just wonder, because in New Zealand there are not many big companies. Is that fair to say most of your clients are government sector, public sector?
Yeah, we do have a lot of government and public sector
Is
clients.
it possible to give one example? Like, what do you do for this organization or for this government?
So
Enough obligation.
I'm not.
Do you want to just repeat that, Darren?
That's right. So they're just giving us some examples. Like to question what are some of our example clients in New Zealand? Do we know, Darren? Are we able to?
I've got many big companies here.
Yeah.
And I just see some applications to certain government department or organization, but I don't really know how practical, who you guys deal with.
Yeah.
Like maybe one good example of what you do for this government department.
Yeah. Yeah, there's been a few. I just want to be careful what I do share.
Yeah, something we can probably take offline. I mean,
Yeah,
we work pretty well, pretty much across government, really. So the large agencies and some of the smaller ones as well. So yeah, there'll definitely be a number of examples, but happy to take that offline.
Yeah, more than happy.
Cool. Just because this has been recorded and put on the internet, so.
Yes.
Uptake. We've just had a question. What is the uptake of CMDB for organisations in New Zealand? Bleeding edge or becoming more mainstream and must have to raise maturity? This depends. I think it's pretty much everybody's got a CMDB. Well, most have a CMDB to some degree. A lot not happy with it. Forbes said 85% of people failed. I reckon to realise value, I reckon it's probably higher. You see the number of people using ownership is very low at the moment because this is a new concept, but it's one that is really easy to implement and the business just gets it. So every time we've been out there to, and proposed this, the business users within there have been like, yeah, I get the CMDB now. Why was this so hard, kind of thing. It's like, I understand what's going on. So it definitely allows you to cut it through. And because we're not replacing anything, you're safe putting it in. So I guess that those who are taking this ownership approach can get to the high levels of maturity really quickly. For everybody else who's not using ownership, it's a really tough journey. Like, I mean, that spiral Darren showed at the beginning is almost inevitable that you're going to hit it. You may just, by throwing people and process and resource at it, you're going to delay that spiral. But it's, by having the ownership there, it definitely allows you to cut through and gives you a chance to get through it.
Yeah, cool. And I suppose I'll just elaborate on that as well. So a lot of this comes down from the fulfillers in the process. So the service desk is very important when it comes to using the CMDB, because the ITSM processes, a lot of it can come from the service desk. So are they choosing the right CI? How is it easier for them to choose the right CI? Do they know why they need to choose the right CI? And not first time, as we've talked about, but at least the basic concepts of why it is we're choosing those options and the impact it has to the rest of the business. So when we talk about uptake and maturity, that just even simple things like that could really help uplift that maturity.
We have one about how long does it take to embed the change? It depends on what change. Like as we said earlier, it's an iterative and evolving journey. With this, so to actually get a CMDB in is really straightforward in terms of those business services and stuff. And if you align with the op model, it becomes almost intuitive to people. So there is no real embedding it. And as I mentioned with the example of the government one at the beginning, the fact of switching from CI to assignment group, as long as you make that 100% of the time, you always do CI rather than assignment, and as long as you kind of use UI to discourage them from updating the assignment group, it sort of becomes intuitive. As I mentioned, day one, they took that and just ran with it, and there was no complaints, no comments, nothing. In fact, I don't think anyone really brought it up. It just happened. So bits of that can be easy to embed, and because you're getting the system to do the work, it kind of takes the thinking away from people. So to embed technically will take you a bit of time to go through this and figure out what you want to do and prioritize and all that. But the idea is to be intuitive so that there's actually no change uptake cost for the users, because they realize this is saving them time, a lot of less effort. They don't really have to think about mundane things like process. They can focus on dealing with risk and stuff that's useful. Cool. Darren?
Yeah, no, so business change, as you outlined, really important here, because again, making sure that it doesn't be seen as just a technical exercise for IT, it is for the organization. That business change piece is important. So communicating, getting the message out there, focusing on the why and the outputs, benefiting the organization early on, especially if it's been stood up as a project. Early on, that message is also key.
We're out of questions online. That has been a fantastic Q&A session. I thank you very much for everyone who's contributed. If there's anything else, please feel free to hastily press enter now in the dying couple of minutes. But otherwise, we'll probably give the conclusion and close. Oh, yeah, just got a thank you through. Thanks very much.
Cool. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Lionel.
Thank you,
good.
Mark.
Yeah, thanks so much for attending. Darren, do you want to close out?
Yeah, so thank you all. Thank you all for joining. This has been a pleasure to get the opportunity to showcase some of the things that we've been doing. And it's been really good of where it's come from as well, the foundation of the methodology. But for those of you who've joined in the office today, it's quite rare to get into the city these days in our work from home culture. So thanks very much for joining. The weather's not been too good. And everyone online as well, I hope you've really enjoyed it. And so hopefully speak to you all and be in touch with you soon.
Thanks very much.